1, 2,
Standing
go.
by. You know it.
Here we go.
Hey, everybody, you're listening to and possibly watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz,
And I'm Steve Morey.
and we are your hairy, heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in or possibly stream in. And you'll notice that we don't have Brother Caleb with us tonight. Unfortunately, he's a homo owner, and he's dealing with a lot of stuff around the house that has been swallowing up all his time. So unfortunately, we don't have him. But we have a more than adequate and handsome substitute. For the first time on our show, please welcome Tony Gilkinson.
Hey there. Thanks.
So Tony, sometimes you have chimed in on some of our live streams with comments, and as an online chat, we've known each other for years in that capacity. Still long for the day I get to meet you in person. I'm sure it'll happen at some point. I still have this dream of us doing like a theater thing together. You know, wishing there was
That'd be awesome.
You know, the gay version of Love Letters or something. You know, you have to rehearse. You know, just read that. So why don't you please introduce yourself?
All right. Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on. So as you see, Tony Gilkinson, and we'll go into it, but I've been a longtime follower, first time joiner, I guess, in this one. But so I'm down here in Tampa, Florida. So I was actually back in my home state. I was born and raised here and lived in Seattle for 20 years and then came back to Florida. And I've been here since 2011. So it's late. I just realized I forget about this, that we come on, and I'm always getting ready for watching this in bed. Or watching in the pool. I think I've sent some images of me sitting in the pool watching this and everything. So in the past for a late night swim.
So one thing we do whenever we have a new guest on is if you like feed into the 80s and the old Loverboy song, we start from the start. So Tony, how did you first get into comic books?
Yeah. So it kind of goes into this theme for here. So for me, drugstores, I don't know if these drugstores exist up north or anything like that, but there was an Eckerd drugstore is what for me, and that's how I found comics. And so there'd be a U-Save grocery store and an Eckerd Drugs next door. And so I'd be there on the spinny rack looking at comics. And so I would pick up an early issue of X-Men, so it was from way back then. That was it. Uncanny X-Men for me, the Christmas issue with Kitty Pryde when she's running from an alien-ish type of monster. A Christmas issue was my first real delve into comics, right? So that, and then there's a Superman Shazam comic from the same time, 81, 82 kind of stuff. Yeah. And it was a crossover between them. And I remember those are the first two comics I pulled off a rack and I had my mom buy them for me. I mean, I was 10, 11 years old. That's how I got into it.
It's great you have that.
And Tony, I think you provided us with the image of that cover of that first X-Men here.
That's it. Yes, that's right.
Merry Christmas. X-Men 1, was it 143? I think
143. That's right.
Yeah.
So
that was Burns' last issue too.
And and I didn't know, of course, at that time, I had no idea that Days of Future Past was like right before this, and all those things. So as I started to collect forward and I got into comics, then I started to collect backwards and went all the way back to issue 130 and then stayed with it. I never collected past issue 130. Oh yes, right there,
Yeah,
right
there
there.
you go.
There it is. Introduction of
And you're-
Dazzler.
Number 130 right there with Dazzler.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this
It looks
is a
very
topic-
small, but it's very large.
Maybe this is a topic we can keep going on. So, Steve, when did you first become aware of the X-Men?
I became aware of the X-Men on
Oh, man.
a cold winter's day. So the first X-Men comic, and I actually dug back into my boxes to find it. And I've shown this before, when we did sort of our history of our comic loving people.
That's
this was my
right.
first X-Men comic.
Oh.
Okay.
Classic X-Men number 30, Steve Lytle cover, and RIP. And this, I had no idea what was going on. If anybody recognizes this, I can't remember the original X-Men issue of X-Men or Uncanny that this was, but this is actually part of the two-parter with Arcade, where he captures all the X-Men and has them kind of fight sort of robot versions of each other.
Is that 145, which is 2 issues later with Dr. Doom and Arcade? It could be.
No, I think it's a little earlier. I think it's the first two-parter.
Oh, the first one that was
earlier.
Okay.
First time where,
Yeah,
Okay.
this one doesn't have Doom at all in it, but it does have an interesting sort of backup, mini story with Arcade sort of waking up in the middle of the night and stumbling around, and then basically falling into his own nightmare scenario contraptions where he encounters sort of a child version of himself, and that kills it. And it's supposed to be very metaphorical, and it is actually a very creepy story for one of the, I think, perennially one of the worst X-Men villains that everyone seems to hate. Was the first villain I got to read, so it was very interesting. But yeah, I love it. I've kept this issue ever since I got this one. This one was actually from 1988, so that was the first X-Men issue I picked up.
Okay,
wow.
I'm
looking. How about you, Bill? What was yours?
Issue, because I'm old as sand. My first issue was X-Men 87, so this was during the period before they rebooted the X-Men, where there was a reprint title.
Yeah,
and for some reason, so it has an on sale date according to Mike's Amazing World of January 1st, 1974. So I'd been reading comic books like about 4 months. So
okay,
there was a situation though with the newsstand by me. I had 2 newsstands by me: the Lorraine's and the Dolly Madison shop in our house in Passaic. And for both of them, for some reason, with the Marvel reprints, Marvel Tales and Marvel Triple Action were no problem to find, but it was a little choppy with some of the other reprint titles like X-Men, Marvel's Greatest Comics, Marvel Double Feature. So they wouldn't always get every issue in for some reason. And I seem to remember a lot of gaps in the X-Men, but it was when it was a reprint title, it was X-Men 87, and which reprinted X-Men number 39 from 1967. Yeah.
And to me, and I know we've talked about this before, but that whole time period of the X-Men where it's just sort of like, oh, it's just repackaged, reprinted stories of the X-Men characters. That it kind of boggles my mind that it just was so unpopular, essentially unpopular of a title, that for 40, 50 issues, it was just nothing but reprint.
Yeah, it was from I can even pull this right up. It was from issue number 67 to, where are you, 93.
Yeah.
And then the title was actually canceled. And what the intention was, you remember Giant Size X-Men number 1. I mean, you two might not remember it. I remember it. I
remember like it was yesterday that I
remember my copy just like evaporating because I reread it so many times. But the X-Men ongoing was canceled, and then they canceled the Giant Size line because it was going to be a quarterly title of Giant Size X-Men with new stories, and Invaders was the same way. Supervillain Team was the same way, And then, they had these stories they'd already prepared. Let's just revive the X-Men as an ongoing, and they did it with the others, so it was Invaders #1 and all that stuff. But yeah, like I came in during the reprint period.
I mean,
it was at least they were on the newsstands in some form,
Yeah, I mean that is one of the good things about it.
Yeah,
but it's just very odd that it was so unpopular that for a period of
it just didn't connect.
Years.
And you look at some of the other super teams. Like Marvel didn't have that many, but you look at DC's. There was no Challengers of the Unknown, there was no Metal Men, there was no Doom Patrol. And these were all titles in the 60s that maintains success for at least a period of time. It's kind of strange though, because like the X-Men are kind of like, if you view it through those lens, they're like one of the most DC teams in the 60s.
They had their own life. That was the thing. Like they were very. It
was like their own world. Of course there were crossovers, but they were kind of in their own. They were kind of in their own corner there.
Very colorful, and it is really interesting. That now, I mean, X-Men, basically half of everything that Marvel puts out is X-Men. The other half is Avengers or some kind of other title. When they start going through they're like, oh, we need to do more supernatural stuff. We need to bring back Ghost Rider, or do more Moon Knight, or do things like that. But X-Men is just this giant chunk of Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can count on there being at least 10 titles a month. Even when they've dipped, they just move on that. So that kind of ties in with some news there. So Steve, we're gonna play the news. So why don't you talk about two of the bits of news that are X related?
So just we talked about this a few weeks ago when they first announced in March the first set of 3 X-Men titles that they're going to be coming out with, post Fall of X-Men, post Krakoan Saga, when they reboot the entire line. And those 3 were Uncanny X-Men with Gail Simone and David Marquez, X-Men, adjectiveless X-Men with Jen McKay and Ryan Stegman, and Exceptional X-Men with Eve Ewing and Carmen Carnero. And they announced another 3, Phoenix with Stephanie Phillips and Alessandro Miracolo, Nyx, which Bill is really looking forward to, by Jackson Lansing, Colin Kelly, and Francesco Moratarino on art, and a new X-Force title by Jeffrey Thorne and Marcus Toe. They've also mentioned that there will be an X-Factor title that'll also be coming out, whether that's going to be an ongoing or a maxi series or a mini series, we're not sure. And then also the big announcement where, they're looking to have at least a new #1 X-Men title, X title of some sort every month for the foreseeable future. And that's, that's very likely if we, have a bunch of the miniseries, similar to how things were right before the Krakoan Saga and then during the Krakoan Saga, where they were, popping up with different X titles left, right, and center. So basically, it's a full reboot of more of the same in terms of volume, which is always frustrating for those of us who love to follow the X-Men and get really excited when they have new titles and then get burnt out. So I'm hoping that they'll be independent enough where we don't have to buy every issue of every series that's released in order to figure out what's going on. That the titles themselves are a little bit more independent, have their own tracks. Generally in the X universe, who knows? Because all it takes is one big mega crossover event to kind of force you to buy 30 issues a month. So I don't know. Which book so far are you guys really looking forward to?
Uncanny. Just given what Gail's revealed about her plans for it.
Yeah.
where it's located. I thought was novel, and yeah, I mean, I do have to say that there wasn't any title that was announced where I was like, oh,
I have to read that.
I've maintained for a long time, and it was one of the reasons why I really liked Hoxpox at the start. Was they're a continuity nightmare. I find it, people say DC is a rough continuity, but I can rarely read an X-Men book, for more than 2-3 issues without consulting, Wikipedia. Like, who the hell is that?
Who are they bringing back this time, and why are they so important? Yeah,
and I mean, with the for a franchise that's been around that long and have had so many stories tied into it, it's gonna happen. I mean, it's gonna happen where you really have to be like a wrangler. I mean, editing these books must be yikes. Where you're like, wait, is he immune or not? Like this. I'm sure those questions come up. So, but yeah, so there, I would have to say Uncanny, but at the same token, there wasn't really a book that. Did you mention the Storm ongoing?
No,
I didn't mention that, but I'm sure that's one of them.
That's one. That's
Yeah.
Because she's not on any of these team books, right?
No,
so
no.
I know, which I'm so kind of shocked about. But
the fact that they've had several Storm volumes in the past, I guess, like maybe 6-7 years. The latest one was kind of just a mini series that took place right after she had been de-aged and was kind of still sort of Mohawk punk, biker chick, kind of stealing stuff, but also being good-hearted scamp. I don't know. I read most of that. I thought it was pretty fun. But I always appreciate adult Storm being freaking awesome. Like the series, maybe it was maybe 2018. Was it? She had her own mini title. 12 issues. It was great series.
I actually think I have every issue of that one.
Yeah, that was a really great series. I can't recall who was on that title, but I thought they did a great job. It was one of those books that I look forward to reading every time I picked it up. So. Yeah. What about you, Tony?
I'm a big fan of Storm, so I was kind of hoping to see her on a team book. But Uncanny, like Bill, I think that's the one for me. I like the characters that are in that, and I like Gail Simone. So I'm really has she ever written an X book before? I don't actually even remember.
I know she's written Domino.
Okay, but not maybe a team book.
Domino. I'm not sure if she's done other stuff though.
Yeah, so I'm actually excited about that. I would say the Phoenix series because I'm curious what they're doing. If it's all going to come back to Jean or if it's going to be this team of Phoenix. I don't know what it is, but I'm intrigued by the Phoenix book. So we'll see where that one goes.
I am too, especially after the Louise Simonson Jean Grey mini, the 4-part that came out after fall, around fall back. So that's something I will probably be picking up Phoenix along with Uncanny. I think Uncanny is going to be my main go-to.
Yeah, and
because I love Uncanny.
Me too. It's been with me forever, right? So I'll probably pick them all up, but I don't have just to start it. But I don't know if I'll stay with them, because I'm just not a 30 book of one title type of thing. I just can't do it. That's when once House of X and Powers of X started getting like this, I was like, oh my gosh, I was fine when it started, but it got to be too big and I just couldn't keep up. So I started giving up on stuff.
I just did some checking on Gail, and she has written Deadpool, and she also wrote Agent X, which was Cable when they rebranded all the titles in the early 2000s. Right. Yeah. So,
but I did,
but not a hell of a lot. Not a hell of a lot.
Yeah. So I did actually see this, and I think a couple of us actually saw this posted in a recent Reddit Reddit post. If I can bring it up, if it will let me. There we go.
Yeah.
Just a listing of essentially every mutant who's been part of an X-Men book at some point in the past 60 years.
Well, I think this is more the cast because I can't think of a time where they would have welcomed like a regular Sentinel. So I think this may be more the cast of.
Well, it's definitely cast. I mean, you've got Bamfs,
And you got mutant babies, the Art Adams
X babies,
X babies, yeah.
Yeah, you've got the original X Factor team,
yeah,
or at least maybe the post-apocalypse X Factor team there with Archangel. I mean, there's just everybody. There's some Alpha Flight people in there.
Yeah, Red Raven was never a member. Yeah,
I mean,
more like the cast.
They're not necessarily members of X-Men, but they've been in X titles. Have been part of the saga over the years.
There's Kazar.
This makes for great listening, by the way. So
I know.
There's Kazar.
See what we're looking at. If you want to see what we're looking at, check us out on our YouTube channel or on the Facebook Live on our page, the Comic Book Nerds Podcast.
What artist is it that did this? Did you have that, or you just grabbed it off?
No, I wasn't able to find the attribution, which really sucks because this is great. This might be like
they may have combined a couple of artists on here.
Very possibly.
It's hard to tell from because you can't really get a very. Again, this is great radio.
You could zoom in. You can zoom in.
I have to wonder. In today's world, I mean, I love artists and I think they're the best and stuff, but sometimes I wonder on these kind of images today, they're not a George Perez day. Are these done, digitally and then just layered onto one giant artwork? Or is this something, I wonder if he actually penciled this whole thing, and whether digitally or not, like if he did it, or if it's just a bunch of characters that he layered onto the top of each other. It's amazing.
It'll be layers on layers on layers on layers. Very likely it could be, but
it's a very George Perez, type of accomplishment.
Yeah. And I did want to acknowledge while they're up here, we did have a couple of people joining us. Michael Anthony Pagano. Oh my OMG! Hello, handsome bears. Hello, Michael Anthony. We've got Kevin Sonicson. Sup, homos. Sup, Kevin.
Sup, Kevin.
David Hazan also joined. Hello, David. Hey, boys.
From our live show, if you want to see what he looks like and sounds like. The koala.
Michael here also mentioned the Dazzler poster in the background. Good eye. But yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of X books that are coming up, and as Bavord has mentioned, one new number one every month for the next foreseeable future. So be prepared for a lot. Now the second bit of news, I think.
Going, by the way, I'm sad. I'm one of those that I'm sad that whole thing is just basically looks like it's just getting erased, and so I don't know. I liked it for 5 years.
It was pretty solid and very, very interconnected. There were parts where that continuity kind of meandered a bit.
It got to be unwieldy for me. Which was a shame because I so enjoyed the start of Hoxpox.
Right, me too.
I so enjoyed it, and I thought, well, this is my opera. And then, it wasn't like there weren't stories, even in the few years preceding it, that I didn't cotton to. I really liked the Bendis stuff. May have been a case of staying around a little too long, but I thought that really gave the franchise kind of an adrenaline boost, with the notion of younger versions, and the other X-Men title was I thought particularly his characterizations of Magneto and of Colossus I thought were just right on the money. So
I loved Uncanny X-Men in that time period as well, where you had sort of Cyclops and Emma Frost kind of leading a rogue group of young mutants, kind of as a mutant liberation, team, as opposed to sort of like, hey, we're just everybody's hero kind of thing, which was really
some of the
great.
other connected titles around that time, like Uncanny Avengers.
I mean, there were some, because there were also, you had Sixus / Axis, I guess, was happening at that time. Yeah. So so you had Uncanny Avengers and Wolverine popping up on certain things. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, for our second bit of news, this was just released this week to a lot of the usual fanfare that surrounds a new movie trailer. Every time that a new superhero movie trailer comes out, there's a teaser to the trailer, a trailer to the teaser to the trailer to the trailer, and this one didn't disappoint. It was the third Deadpool movie, or Deadpool and Wolverine. After we had the revealing trailer a couple months ago, now we had an even more revealing trailer this time, filled with Easter eggs and references and a much bigger look at one of the villains, which really, really was exciting. So,
LFG.
So what did you? What did you guys think of the new Deadpool and Wolverine trailer?
I was shocked at their potty mouth. Shocked at their potty mouth.
So naughty, saying the F word.
They had to direct me
so many times.
It's too much. I don't know why they had to be so use such
vulgar.
Language. Yeah.
Language.
I didn't see a red band before the trailer started, so I was actually not expecting the F-bomb to become left and right, and I was playing it in my I work from home, and I had it up, not like I was on a meeting or anything, but I had the volume turned up, and my mother-in-law is in the bedroom next to me, and I'm like, oh crap, like trying to turn it down.
What is he listening to? That's just foul.
So I loved it, and the best for me, the best Easter egg is Liefeld's feet or whatever.
Is his story? Is it like nothing but feet or something like that?
Liefeld's just feet.
Just feet or whatever. So good for us old school people who know. That was a great bit, a laugh out loud moment that I saw it in the background. So yeah, it was great.
Absolutely. And apparently Ryan Reynolds, as the story goes, did talk about that particular gag with Liefeld before it got into the movie. So Liefeld, of course, good humor against himself, about himself, probably because, well, hey, he still got paid, bitches. So, he's fine with the fact that he never learned how to make feet or draw feet. But I just thought that was super clever. Also, Cassandra Nova, like, this is a character I didn't think I would ever see, ever depicted on screen, but very, very sinister and creepy in her, happy, proper British way, with the perfectly bald pate, and not looking all wrinkled and prunish yet. So I'm wondering if that might be sort of part of what's going on in this particular movie, alternate version of it or something. But did anybody notice the giant Ant-Man skull fortress? That was cool. That
was cool. And then if because I watched it like several times, they show the profile of him laying the whole body earlier on. I'm a terrible comics guy. What's the big smoke monster from Loki called? In the trailer, Argoroth or whatever, but he comes across, and then you can see Ant-Man's body laying in profile, and then the very next one is where you see his helmet open up and everything. So I didn't catch that at first, and I watched it the next time I saw it there. So yeah.
Oh, now I have to watch it again and again and again, and I'm sure I'll be seeing it a million times when I go to the movies up until July.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
I'm looking forward to it. Credits. I just took a look at the credits. And there's 5 credited writers. One is Ryan Reynolds. I don't think it's a surprise because he's done that before for the Deadpool movies. But Zeb Wells, comic book writer, is one of the writers on this. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep.
I'm glad to see, we've been teased it for a while now, but I think the Wolverine costume looks good on film. So
it does.
I
mean,
scared of it in the early 2000s. So.
Yeah, 1999, they were we'll never show their actual, nobody wants to see colorful spandex on on screen. Well, here we are 20 some years later, and it's like, no, that's what we've always wanted to see, and now we get to see it.
And it looks good.
Yep.
Even though friends don't let friends dress like the Los Angeles Rams or whatever there is one bit of sad news about this that just came out as well. Ray Chen, who is a production designer on Deadpool and Wolverine, just passed away unexpectedly a couple days ago. So unfortunately, was never able to see it on the big screen. All the work that he did. He apparently has been an art director and a designer on a lot of MCU movies. So he's had his stamp on different shows like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He's worked on Quantumania. He's worked on Spider-Man: Far From Home and a couple of the Guardians of the Galaxy and Doctor Strange movies. So he was apparently a very prominent member of the MCU production family who passed away on this one. So this was his last film, but which is unfortunate. But looks like the work that was put into this is definitely going to be worth the wait since the last Deadpool movie. And seeing as how this is the only Marvel movie that we're getting this year, I think there's a lot of expectation pegged on it being just a blast. So.
And they have let some things out of the bag about ties to the MCU. The time variance authority is a factor in this. That's known. I think that's the character that
Paradox, Matthew McFadden.
McFadden is playing. So, yep. I
believe he spells his name with 2 T's.
Yeah, hooray for Matthew.
Hooray for Matthew.
It'll take like 10 hours to explain that. Yeah.
We did just have John
jokes. Hey,
Inside
Johnny.
joke. John throwing us the horns.
Yeah,
John. But
John,
I'm excited.
Spot with Steve Woodard today. Oh boy, yeah. Well, it was in good fun.
Oh boy.
So
well, cool. I mean, was there any other bits of X-Men news that you
I don't think so. Or again, some of the stuff we had planned to discuss with Caleb, like Ed Pisker, we're just gonna table that because it's X. Tonight's just X.
This is a very special X episode. It's all X-Men.
And I don't think we've had an X episode since Hoxpox.
It absolutely, yeah. I think that was the last time where it was just
I don't think we've had it was all X, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
So
it was time. It was definitely time. And with Tony joining us, absolutely,
I'm honored. So,
so hey, did we want to get into X-Men 97, or do we want to get into our comics?
I think we probably should get into X-Men 97 first because it kind of ties in with a lot of the books we're talking about later on that we've chosen as X titles of the past that we've enjoyed. And some of the I know, Steve, you decided to go like past, so yeah, it's all past.
It's all past. Well,
it's
that's the thing.
Past. Yeah, days of past.
When you guys started talking about what books you wanted to talk about, and like when the eras that you were going to bring up. I was like, hey, I gotta go back to my junior high days where it was like X-Men all the time and X Factor. I was a huge fan. Buying my comics every other week. But and also what was really big in 1991, you had a lot of things that were happening in the X-Men comics, and then you also had between 91 and 92 a new cartoon series. That you might have remembered.
So I have to ask you guys because you two are younger than I am. As I said earlier before, I'm old as sand.
By a few, we're different by a few days.
I was already out of college when I was in college when X-Men Pride of the X-Men pilot, the failed pilot, which I think is a joy. I think
I love it. I remember watching it on VHS, renting it from the Blockbuster.
Like I would have done anything to have that toy line. because it was, it was basically conceived to just sell toys. I mean, it was all that was. But to going into the 90s series, I'm just interested in you guys. Like, so this was this like required Saturday morning viewing for you when this was up? Because I was Mr. Time Delay, and I was in my 20s and I was doing things people in their 20s do in their 20s.
Stay at home and watch cartoons was not one of them. What's going on?
No, Steve, that wasn't me.
Well, Bill, I'm not. I don't actually know how old you are, but I don't think I'm much younger than that much.
Yeah,
I'm because I'm 54. So.
Oh my God. Okay. Then I'll shut up.
So we're closer. So I was 22. 1992. I was 22.
Okay. For some reason, I thought you were like I thought you were a bit younger.
In your 20s.
For that.
Thank you. So
the long hair.
For the official age, I am 56. So
okay. So see, we're close. We're close. Yeah. So
I am not.
Steve, was this required viewing P17?
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely was. And this actually, this may just be my memory just being weird. But I remember in the early 90s, there were frequently you would have new cartoon series, the Saturday morning cartoon series, or even the the afternoon during the week cartoon series would, especially the big titles, would have an evening premiere at some point during the week. When it was first being shown. I remember watching Tiny Toons. It came on. It was an 8 p.m. special when the first episode of Tiny Toons was premiered before it moved to its to its usual time slot. And I believe X-Men animated series was the same way, because I do have very distinct memories of having a sleepover at a friend's house, Mr. J. Champy, in Rhode Island, and watching this, like waking, basically at night, just like watching this this premiere episode. So, that would have been it could just be like a weird time thing that maybe it was 8 in the morning instead of 8 at night. Who knows? But it does something this big probably would have been an evening premiere before you would watch it on Saturday morning cartoons. But it was definitely required. You had to watch it if you were in junior high, which I was. It was definitely something that you caught every week and followed religiously. And I used to love watching the episodes and going, oh, that's just like that one issue, or oh, I remember that character, they introduced that character and blah blah blah, and just getting super nerdy about it and had the Marvel handbook and all of that stuff, so I could pick out who these characters were that they would throw in for these 22-minute episodes every week. But pretty fantastic stuff. Real
quick, because you're talking about prior to the X-Men and then of course the X-Men the animated series, but did either of you catch, I know it was on, but I have to relate to a movie where I saw it first, but of course on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends had the X-Men on in that one episode.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Where they went to the X-Men thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw that. I don't think I saw that episode when it was on, but I don't know if you guys know this, and it's ingrained in my memory, is that movie Mr. Mom with Michael Keaton. So, and it's like early 80s, but there's a moment when the kids are home and Michael Keaton's trying to figure, if you guys know the movie, he's trying to figure out how to take care of the house and everything. And all this stuff's going on, and the kid is watching Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and the X-Men come up on the television. And so me seeing a cartoon version of the X-Men way back then, I mean, I remember screaming at it. And then, of course, watching it over and over on cable in my house, and seeing it just for that. The movie, yes, but I would watch over and over, and I ended up like recording it on Betamax, and I would rewind it just to see that little bit, because I never saw that episode when it was on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I never saw the X-Men on that. So for it, and I don't think I ever did see it in all those, those decades. It wasn't until much later when I could see it on Disney Plus or something like that, where I actually found it, in more recent years of that episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's in there. It's a little.
And I also love that they that they bridged in Iceman and Firestar. That this was the team we used to be on.
Right. Right.
Yeah. We used to hang out with these losers before we started hanging out with you, buddy.
Yeah.
And Wolverine with his inexplicable Australian accent.
Yeah, that was so weird. They made him Australian.
Yeah.
You know, those crazy Australians north of the border.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I actually just saw that for the first time maybe about 6
Mhm.
months ago when it was put onto Disney Plus. I was going through all the episodes of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and was like, I don't remember this one. And we got
Yeah.
to watch it. So
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it was interesting. But yeah, so I mean, you know, X-Men the animated series, I think it obviously didn't have the I would say the artistic consistency of, say, Batman the animated series, because Bruce Timm, you know,
Well,
really did a great
you
job
know, if
keeping
you look,
quality
at,
in
I
that.
mean, I think they were operating at, a fraction of the budget.
Oh,
That,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this
Yeah, I mean
was,
it.
this was like Nelvana was, just like and Marvel Productions, they were just like cranking out stuff. So, I don't think, tremendous thought went into the animation itself.
The
That
animation's
it's as
not
good as
great.
it is, I think is testimony just to the core material that they were hitting, basing the thing on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, I of course looked at it with nostalgia glasses for many, many, many years, and getting to see it again when they put it back on the Disney Plus in preparation for, you know, the X-Men
97.
'97 revival. Um, yeah, I mean there are some pretty big stinkers in terms of quality. Some of these episodes throughout the seasons, where they're just not that great. And I look frozen. Am I frozen?
Yeah, you're
I'm
frozen,
not.
but we're
Oh,
hearing you.
okay.
You'll
Yeah.
come back.
Okay. Well, that's
Okay.
good. The video will catch back up, and now I just have a weird face on. But yeah, I mean, like the
There
quality
you are.
there. The quality was not consistently great, and I think I loved it as a kid. I loved it more just for the stories, just for being able to see, you know, these characters that I loved reading about so much, seeing them in motion, seeing them animated. And I think that was, you know, like you said, the core material was strong enough to have people want to watch this, have kids really want to watch this from week to week, regardless of the quality, and also regardless of how they aired it, because they didn't always air the episodes in order. Just like most Saturday morning cartoons, or after, you know, the after school afternoon Monday through Friday cartoon blocks. Sometimes they would do reruns, or they would,
Yeah.
you know, show episodes out of order. It would be a big old mess. And so if you had like multi-part episodes,
Yeah.
which
And
is one
sometimes
reason
they
why
would
they
just
started
take in
avoiding.
what was ready. Sometimes they
Yeah,
would
it's
just
like,
say,
here's
that's in the can. So what? Just put it
here
up.
you go. Let's put this
Yeah.
out. And you know, for a show that's based on a series that is, you know, really dependent on continuity ish, it could be a little bit confusing. But I don't think anybody really cared. I think
Mhm.
we were all pretty, you know, pretty excited that it was on and that it existed. So, so how did you feel about watching it as an adult when you did get to watch it for the first time, Bill?
I caught episodes here and there just because, I'm interested. But I do think that binging it probably didn't help because you notice some of the holes. You notice some of the design, like there's periods in the second season where Jubilee has a different design in every episode. Right. It's really weird.
Sometimes she looks like a dude.
So I don't think, because that was one of the
Never mind.
early Disney Plus binges.
Mm-hmm.
I had the episodes on DVD because I buy everything. I was getting everything, but I trailed off after when they had the season sets. I trailed off after the first season, but then I watched everything straight through because it was at your fingertips.
Right.
I think I would have enjoyed it more had I given it some space and not mainlined it. But one thing I said when we first talked about, I guess during the Wolf of the Week, about the premiere episode of X-Men 95 was, I kind of dismissed some of the voice acting. And, hearing the same actress for Storm and the same actress for Jean Grey, I realized what a good job they did, because, like, to this day, that's the voice of Storm is the animated voice. That's what I hear when I read her. Especially with that joke about, my dear, I'm wearing Chanel. Like that's the voice I hear. And I think I didn't take that. I didn't really appreciate it enough.
Right.
And I think my enjoyment of it probably would have been better served if I'd had not mainlined so much of it so quickly.
Right.
Because you kind of notice holes when it's, bop, back
to back to back.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of that Storm voice, I mean, it was so iconic that Halle Berry, and I mentioned this before, Halle Berry tried to imitate it when she took on.
I never felt that.
I think so. She had the same cadence. She tried the same accent. All of it was the same.
And she gave it up after the first movie. And
she gave it up after the first movie. Was like, no, we're not doing this.
Right.
I can't do it. I'm just doing an imitation. I'm not going to do it. But it literally was like when you watch the movie, she sounds or is trying to sound like the Storm animated voice actress. So
yeah.
But Tony, what about you? Like when you first caught this, whatever your age was at the time, if you saw it when you were 22 or if you saw it a little bit later on, like what did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was in my 20s and I was in a relationship, and the person I was with, of course, was not into it. So actually for Saturday mornings, it would be because he'd be like sleeping or something, and I'd be downstairs like a little kid watching it before he'd wake up,
Charms.
Yeah, exactly. So it was good. And, for me, the opening was great because it reminded me of Thundercats. Like Thundercats, the original series, it had a great opening with all the characters flying, and moving around, and it went from Cheetah to the next character, all this. And then the opening of the X-Men is just like that. And I love the opening. So I actually was one of those, is I would sit and I couldn't wait for the opening to happen every single week. Right. So I enjoyed that. And probably the best animation of the series is that opening, moment of it, consistency. And now, of course, with 97, how it's changing up every single time, every episode. It's just a little bit different, which is pretty cool. So it was good, but same thing though, as the series went on up until 96, I moved to Seattle in 1996. So my life, I moved to Salt Lake City in 95 and then Seattle. So I didn't catch it. I wasn't, I didn't see every single episode. And when I went back, same like Bill during Disney Plus, and I started to rewatch them, I realized I had missed a lot of episodes, or I had zero memory because they just did not, stay with me. Whichever one of those two were, but I'm pretty sure it was just I missed a lot of episodes. But I didn't do like Bill. I didn't, binge it. I would when Disney Plus came, it was one of the first things I would watch. But I would catch them every so often, and then same thing though. The animation, all this stuff, but it's classic. It's 90s. We didn't have a movie yet, at that point in the 90s. I didn't even think we'd ever get a real movie because I never thought the technology would ever allow us to have, that. And of course, come year 2000, we get the first movie, so it wasn't that much longer, after X-Men Animated ended. So, yeah, but it's always, so I'm definitely one of those when they announced 97 coming back, I was very excited about that. So, and I've enjoyed the first season. I don't know about you guys, so I've enjoyed it.
I mean, it was all right. It's okay. Yeah. No emotional impact whatsoever on me. No, I have to say, going back and rewatching some of these episodes, and just like you, Tony, like there are episodes where I'm like, I know I watched it when it was on in like 1993, 1994. I have no recollection whatsoever of it. And, it didn't really have as much emotional impact. I mean, it had like, the impact of seeing anything that you were really excited about when you were a young person. Like that's the kind of impact it had, just sort of that overall feeling, that kind of thing that we pull back on 20 years later and say, that's the good feeling nostalgia that we get to rekindle every once in a while. This goes beyond that. And I think that's to its credit. and Bo DeMeo, obviously, the former showrunner. I think this is one thing that really was important for him, was that it's not just a continuation. It's not just picking up from the last episode, which it does, but it takes the story, it takes the characters into a much different direction, a much more emotional and mature direction than they probably could have gotten away with back in the 90s for Saturday morning or after school cartoons.
Sure.
And I have to say, like, some of these episodes, you get tears from me. You get some extremely mature storylines, like emotionally mature, storylines and conversations with these characters. Not even talking about episode 5, which I'm hoping that most of us are recovered from. And the latest episode that came out this week, episode 7, which is, I think it's called Bright Eyes, which, of course, in my head, every time I see Bright Eyes, I'm like, turn around. Anyway, it was still, it continued that kind of like emotional, that mature emotional thing, because it's very directly confronting grief and, how grief is experienced by some of these characters. And yeah, we only get 20 some minutes of these characters, and so they put a lot in. But man,
take a look at the times, because some of the episodes are over 30 minutes.
Really? Yeah. Oh, because they go fast. They feel like they're only
but they're most of them are much longer than your 22-minute animated.
Yeah, they have been. I've noticed that on watching them. But yeah,
which I think is probably to its benefit, where it just gives the story enough time to breathe. Like, one thing that I thought the original series was okay at was taking some of these concepts that would have been like 3, 4, 5 issues in the comics and just distilling them into one episode. The Omega Red, the Omega Red in the comics went on forever in that, and they just chopped it into like little bits and just match it together for what they want, what was important. So I do think the original series was pretty good with that. And you get some of that here, particularly Moira McTaggart. Madeline Pryor. They just took like 40 issues of continuity and say, okay, here she is, and she's leaving. Yeah. And it worked well, because I think a lot of thought went into planning this and conceiving the series.
I'm so excited that we get to see it, and that it is just beyond a just a nostalgia cap. Like, I don't need that, because there's plenty of other things that are really cool, and what they've done is instead of just repackaging it, really doing a good service to the source material.
Yeah. So I think anybody that's listening to or watching this isn't necessarily going to be spoiled by episode 5 and what transpires in that episode. The name of the episode is Remember It. And the main storyline is the UN admitting Genosha as a country into the United Nations, which coincides with the Master Mold Sentinel basically decimating Genosha. And among the casualties include, some of the Morlocks, some of the Hellfire Club, apparently Magneto, and then in the big farewell is Gambit. I kind of realized something where I just I could never stand, I don't care if it's like Mary J. Blige or Big Dipper, like anybody who talks about themselves in the third person. And I think that's why like Gambit was never a favorite. The Gambit needs to get some gumbo. There was always that kind of dialogue there. He referred to himself a lot in the third person, and I think that's one of the rationales why I just never really cottoned to the character, but his departure was incredibly emotional, and it was I was drained at the end of that episode, and I think other people were, because it was so unexpected. You know,
Yeah.
that this was like, if it almost felt like if something like that was going to happen, that was going to be the cliffhanger leading into X-Men 98. You know, I mean, it feels like that huge an event was not necessarily at the midpoint of the series, you know, the expectation would be. So there were a lot of curveballs in that episode, and it was just like you said, a very emotional episode. I think the glimpses of Genosha and the joy on people's faces there, and inspiring, and you know, even the political machinations, you know, how fascinating that was. It was just a really, really good episode, and just leveled me.
Yeah, and I was unexpected by the Gambit, because that's not continuity for us, right? I mean, so I was not expecting that in any way to happen, you know. And of course I was like, oh, something's going to happen, and he'll be fine, you know, whatever. And I was actually, after the episode, going, did he really die? I mean, did they really kill off Gambit in this, type of thing? So, but it was, you know, of course, in this one they took Genosha, and it felt like they did a little bit of Krakoa, put it all together, and you have the, you know, all that stuff happening, because it felt like Krakoa, kind of the party and everything, was more Hellfire Gala type of stuff when the thing happened, more so than when Genosha was happening back then. So I was really kind of intrigued. I was like, oh, they're taking these stories and just working it for the animated universe to make it into one pliable. So I was into that and not expecting the end, you know. So I was shocked. I was still kind of in shock, that waiting for him to like show up, that he's going to show up at the end of episode 8, you know, or something. But yeah, I was. Anyway, it's a spoiler for some, but I know we said it's been enough, right?
Yeah,
so.
I think it's been.
I really don't think this is. I mean, we'll put a spoiler tag on it, but I don't think it's a spoiler for anybody who would be listening. So
right, you know, and like you said, that entire episode was a lot of mature emotional impact.
Sure.
Even, you know, prior to the whole, you know, explosive end. I mean, you had Rogue having to make this sort of romantic decision between these two men that she's had this relationship with, you know, over time, and having to like break up essentially with Gambit and tell him, like, I can't be with you because you can't physically touch me. Like, I need you to touch me, and I can't have that because I'll drain you, and, you know, terrible. And his response to that is like, okay, no worries. Like, I'll, you know, I think you're wrong, but I'll let you deal with it. And she's just sort of like devastated at this. And then, of course, you know, making the decision and dancing very, you know, very romantically with Magneto flying over the over the ballroom, you know, in a very
Nation by Ace of Base, which I thought, oh my god,
the Happy Nation by Ace of Base, like the saddest song ever about Happy Nation. Like, it's just like so depressing it's like a weirdly depressing mix of this song. But then also you have the romantic relationship between Cyclops, Madeline, and Jean Grey that becomes an issue where you know, Jean sees that Cyclops and Madeline have continued to have a romantic and, you know, at least you know, psychically a sexual relationship. And she's like, what the hell, Scott? Like, are you cheating on me with my clone? And he's like, it's not like that, but it's also, you know, you don't get it because you weren't here. I was with her, not with you, even though I thought it was you. And just really frustrating and crazy situation. And then, of course, you have Cable show up right before everything goes to shit. And Madeline recognizes who he is after, you know, 5 years of him popping up throughout the X-Men animated series. They finally figured it out. It's like, holy shit, you're Nathan. Like, never figured that out before then because they didn't have that. They didn't go through that storyline essentially in the animated series prior to now. So, you know, having that reveal was also like, holy crap. And it's like, I'm sorry, Mom. Like, you know, you're all going to die. Like, it's just one of those horrible things where you're like, wow, this is wild.
Yeah.
This is wild. And then, of course, at the end, everybody dies. Like, it's just, But yeah, I thought that was fantastic. And then, of course, for those people who are like, they didn't just kill Gambit off, did they? They didn't really kill him off. The opening credits in the next episode.
He's gone.
Without Magneto and
Replaced by
Gambit.
Nightcrawler. No more Gambit. He's out of the credits.
Nightcrawler was
And so is
inserted.
Magneto.
Yeah.
Yeah, Magneto's out too, and that's just sort of like, wow.
That's one thing I thought the original series and his appearance, like that's my Nightcrawler. That's exactly what I think that character is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's one thing that the original animated series, though he doesn't make a lot of appearances. I think he's only like a handful.
Yeah,
right.
One that's based on him. The episode's named Nightcrawler. But I think that's one thing that the animated series just got like right on the money.
Right.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And the latest episode, the 7th episode, you see him in his other role where he is a priest. He's a very spiritual person, and he gives the eulogy at Gambit's funeral, in full robes with collar, and also in canon reality that he is Rogue's brother, or adopted brother anyway,
right?
Or half brother, I guess, if you want. Yeah, I guess adopted brother. Caesar. My Caesar. Oh, sugar. Yeah, that. It's just, but that was, those are very interesting moments because it got him to be in his sort of like spiritual counselor role, which is not something you would normally see, and you definitely wouldn't have seen in like the 90s cartoon that was geared towards kids.
Right. And a pregnant Jean we would never see, or pregnant
Jean. Oh my God.
In the 90s, we would have never seen that, so yeah.
Because babies come from storks. They don't come from people.
Yeah. So are you guys excited about, although this is another example of a storyline being scrunched between a few episodes of Storm losing her powers and everything and coming back, but coming back in her classic 1970s and 80s outfit, her costume, which I love. And that takes me back to those days and everything. So I love that moment too. So are you guys a fan of that costume or the classic look?
Yeah. Well, that's my Storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my Storm too, right? So
yeah, that's my Storm.
It is. I do love Storm. I do love Storm in her 90s, giant puffy sleeve, like Shaka Khan outfit. I do like that. I enjoy it. I enjoy her mohawk. I love when she has a mohawk. But yeah, there is something about that classic costume that just is like, that just, it's got the wrists attached, like the cape that's attached to the wrists, and it just everything about it is classic.
Yeah. And when I went to reread some of these comics of that era and stuff, same thing with like Bill, I heard Storm's voice as I was rereading these. But then I also looked at it, and that back then you saw Storm actually in just normal clothes, a lot more. Like today's world, it's just like they all live in their costumes. And I'd be like, I'm getting out of this. Like when I get home, if I'm dressed up, first thing I do is take all my clothes. Well, sorry, this is not really. I take all my work clothes off and put on a tank top and a pair of shorts and flip-flops if I'm, or whatever. It annoys me that people just exist in their costumes at all times. But back in the 80s and stuff, they drew them like she would look in these fabulous, really fashionable type of 70s and 80s outfits that Storm would have with a little turban on or something and all those days. And then she would get in her costume and it would be this regal, goddess costume and everything. So I miss that. But
yeah, I think that's something that's a bit uneven right now because I think there are some series that have taken, gone to lengths to address that. I remember when Kelly Sue was on Captain Marvel, when there was a variety of clothes, she said, there's no way this woman would be going to a funeral in a bikini. And that's effectively what what they're made out. So I do think that that's an inconsistency because I can't think of other series, Tony, that you mentioned it where, they're not going to be like lounging around the house, with the mask on, so
right.
do agree that that's something we should see more. That was something we definitely saw. And Kitty as well. Kitty was resistant to even have a costume at the start.
Right.
So I think that's another hallmark of the original series, which I guess it's a pretty good bridge to the comic discussion that we're gonna have.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
So we're gonna be bouncing around. So let's start with our guest first, and then Steve, you bring yours, and then I'll come up from the rear. And I could have said that better.
Hello, Daddy.
That's gonna be my only. Like I said, that's gonna be my only fans. No nudity. I just dress like your dad and finally tell you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You did good. You did good. I'm proud of you.
I'm proud.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess for mine, I'm doing my New Mutants kind of stuff for me, and so really there it is. That's the graphic novel. So the original, and that was a big one for me. I'd been into the X-Men obviously, and then this happened. And I have to say, and I reread this again before today. I read it over last night and everything. And so this was a big deal. And when we talk about the other issue later, I'll mention it too. But there's some uneven moments of this graphic novel, but I think it's one of the things I do like about it. Maybe it's me being part Chinese and stuff, is representation. And I know X-Men's always been about this, but I actually think that Bob McLeod did a good job on actually making them look like their characters should be, right? Like Cannonball is just a Kentucky tall, lanky guy with big ears. He doesn't look anything like that today, but like Karma, she's not a really attractive young woman. She's like a 19-year-old woman here, and she's got that very awkward look, but she looks Asian. And when you look at her, and same thing with Danny, and Roberto deals with the whole thing with him being a half-breed. I mean, yes, it's always been the story of mutants have always been something that's either from a racist background or for the LGBTQ stuff. So rereading it was actually kind of a nice thing. But I have to say, Bill, you reread it. They kind of do the origin of Rain and Danny and Sam and Roberto, and they just skip Karma like that. And she's just already in the lab when they do it. So I was like, wait a second, what the heck? Why did you skip the Asian? So, but for me, I thought it was actually a great story. I'd forgotten the story, the origin story for this, of what it was actually about until I reread it, so, and that it was, when I picked it up, I say pick it up, when I looked on my iPad and reread it, I'd forgotten it was like even a graphic novel. So it was like, it's not a 22-page comic. It's a lot longer. So for me, it was great because this is, there's a connection to Tampa with this that I'll talk about. But, I was loving the X-Men, and they were off in space at this time when this one came out, and they were dealing with that. And I was excited about these new characters that were kind of in my age group. They were a little bit older than me, but I was that connection. And it was like, for me, this was Marvel's version of the Teen Titans for me. And so I was really kind of excited by this series, and I couldn't wait for issue 1, 2, and 3, et cetera, to come out for it. So, but Bill, you reread this today or something?
I mean, my main issue is the villain is Donald Pearson. Who cares about Donald Pierce?
Right.
The Hellfire Club member that you have to go to Wikipedia, you remember who the hell he is. So that was the only downside of it. But I did think, going with what you said about diversity, I think this is just as much of McLeod as it was Claremont of researching these other locations. So it wasn't like a generic area. It was a very specific area of Scotland, right, where the storyline opens. Same thing with Danny Moonstone in the very specific area of Oklahoma where she is. then you have the South with Sam and Brazil with Sunspot. That was one thing rereading it I did appreciate. The getting the band together, I think the element of that, I've seen it done better. I've seen it done much better. But that was one thing in the reread I really did appreciate was the thought that it went into where these characters are from. And it completely aligned with with their personalities and with since you're going to be talking about New Mutants, subsequent storylines really hinge on a lot of that. So that was one thing rereading it that I did appreciate. Who cares about Donald Pierce? I mean, Jesus. So
he was in the Krakoa era at some point. Well, but yeah,
he's in Logan. The character's in Logan,
true.
the movie. Yeah, it had some afterlife, but still, who cares? But I also did like the element when the not to spoil stuff because people can read it. When the conflict is resolved, and they just let the was it Wingard's assistant? Just the Hellfire Club's going to take care of this, and this is like nice détente where Charles is like, yeah, you go do that. Yeah, we're not getting our hands dirty. You take care of that. Which
right.
I thought was a really nice touch, and definitely fits with some of the complexities of the different groups within the X universe, how they basically interact with each other. I thought that was a nice moment that kind of foreshadowed a lot of stuff that comes on later. Because up until even with I would say the big turning point in the comics for me was actually the story where Cyclops leaves. Because that from that point on, it seemed that there was much less black and white and more grays in terms of how characters were treated and how characters behaved. And that was a nice tie in what they had at the end, the mention that I had of like the resolution.
Yeah, that's true. And they have that little thing as well where they just leave Sam behind, Cannonball, at the end, and then he shows up, and he finally gets it. But they're like, "Bye, bitch." Elevators close, and then he comes back at the end. So yeah. Now, Steve, had you read this? I mean, from or ever?
No, I never read the original graphic novel at all.
Okay.
I read the original, the start of the original series.
Yeah.
That lasted about 90? Was it 99 episodes? 99 issues.
100 on the dot.
100 on the dot, and then it changed over to X-Force. I wasn't sure if it was 99 and then became a new number one.
Yeah.
Or okay.
100 basically introduces X-Force.
Yeah. But yeah, I read like the last few issues of New Mutants was like the first time I picked any of that up, and then I went back and reread like the first couple issues in the Devil Bear Saga and all of that, or Demon Bear Saga, and all of that. So I did see some of the classic, but I never read the graphic novel that introduced them. So
wow,
he took us.
Yeah, and it wasn't too long after the New Mutants started that Bill Sinowitz, I don't know how his name is pronounced. Is it? Okay. And him took over in the artwork to a different degree. And as a young kid, that was a very jarring change in the artwork and story. I mean, and it got really dark, of course, with the Demon Bear story and all that. But I'd never seen artwork like that before as a kid, so it was so different.
We talked about this earlier today as we were chatting, and I had been away from comics for a number of years. And the first issue of New Mutants that I read was either the first or the second appearance of Cypher and Warlock when they expanded the team.
Yeah.
And that was a surprise for me because Sienkiewicz was still on the art then, and it was like, this is an interesting artist, and to do what effectively is like a marquee property. Yeah, I was very confused, but got into it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Because the Asgard stuff wasn't too far away, and that stuff was fantastic.
Loved it.
When the New Mutants go to Asgard, that's so good.
Yeah.
Love that.
100%. So, all right. Yeah. So that's for that. I mean, I don't know. Are we going to do 2 rounds, or are we going? We'll just go with both your books. We'll do that.
Yeah.
So,
because you have such a direct tie-in.
Yeah. So the reason I bring up, one, obviously once they started the series, but 2 is actually really important to me because Bob McLeod is from Tampa, and so the artist for the New Mutants is from Tampa. And the comic book store that I used to go to as a young kid, my mom would drive me down to the store, and it was in a storefront, of just a strip mall type of thing. We'd go in, it was called the Fandom Zone. And so when the series started, I had heard about Bob McLeod, but I didn't know him until this issue came out, because the Phantom Zone comic book is actually featured in this comic. So this one is the Sentinels, and they come in and they break through the mall. And the mall is somewhere in New York, but it's based on the Tampa Bay Center, which is in Tampa because Bob's from here. And so it looks like Tampa Bay Center. But if you, on the image that we have here, is you're going to see the Phantom Zone right there. And the guy in the white shirt, that's the logo of the comic book store that I would go to. And like I said, that's Tampa Bay Center, Spencer Gifts and all that. But the guy in the white shirt under the Phantom Zone, that's Tom, the owner of the comic book store. And there's actually, he shows up a few pages earlier, just in the foreground of a panel. But it's so for me, that was just a geek moment to see that. And when that episode, I keep saying episodes, when the issue came out at the comic book store, Bob McLeod was at the comic book store, and that's when I learned that Bob had an art desk in the back of the store. So he would often be in the store all day and drawing in the back. And so a lot of this stuff that we see here was actually produced in the back of my comic book store. So it's, it's pretty cool. And so this one is always going to, on this issue I have several boxes that are in storage. So this was a big one for me, and I have it. It's signed from Bob McLeod. He doesn't do much these days. He's done, after the first 3 issues of New Mutants, he went off, got married, and then, would come back and do inking. He did a lot of inking work. And then once in a while you do pencils. But, the graphic novel and the first 3 issues are the big thing for him. And then outside of some of the other work that he did. And then, there's been some things as I look back that he's come back and done those collective issues where they have like 50 artists on a single issue, and he does like a panel. Right. So there's been some, but yeah, so that's for me from being a Tampian. And yes, people from Tampa are Tampians, not tampons, believe it or not. So we are Tampians. So being a Tampian and knowing that Bob McLeod is also from here and seeing this artwork, it's kind of special for me. So that's where I went back and for mine, with the New Mutants. And I had a full collection. I had all the way up, and I kept going with X-Force too, but I had an unbroken collection as a kid that started right there and went all the way through to the end for this. So New Mutants, it was never consistently great. It had some really amazing moments and some not so good moments, but it's a big series for me, outside of Uncanny being my big issue, but New Mutants was my second going on, probably more so than X Factor and Wolverine solo series, all those things that would come about. I think it was Uncanny and New Mutants right there for years for me on the Marvel side, and then New Teen Titans on the DC side for me. So, yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Here it is.
All right, Steve, let's throw it over to you.
Well, when we were talking about doing an all X-Men episode and the fact that we'd be talking about the X-Men 97 series and the X-Men animated series, there's an aesthetic, let's say, that goes into the X-Men animated series. The costumes, the way the characters interact, just simple things like what they do when they are not wearing their costumes, how they look when they're not wearing their costumes, and what they're doing, what activities they get up to. A lot of that sort of came from, you know, the late 80s, early 90s versions of the Uncanny X-Men and the Adjective X-Men that started in 91. So you had a lot of these characters that kind of hit an image, like a sort of a pop culture, you know, image in the early 90s, and that image just kind of stuck for everybody who was reading comics at that time or saw the cartoon at that time. And that's kind of like what we expect, you know, when we think of Cyclops, when we think of Storm, when we think of, well, I mean, we did talk about Storm. There are a couple ways we could think about Storm and her costume, but, you know, just sort of how these characters look in our heads was really established there in the, you know, the end of Chris Claremont's era and the beginning of Jim Lee coming in. And, you know, the artists that we're working around with Jim Lee, so Wells Portacio, and, you know, the writers like Fabian Nicieza, you know, had this kind of way of writing the X-Men and then drawing the X-Men that the kind of is like what we expect the X-Men to look like. And then the animated series came out and kind of solidified that image for everybody. So what I did, I went back and I reread, you know, the first 3 issues of, you know, of X-Men here, the Adjective X-Men, which is the, oh, hello, other guests.
Sorry, that's Oliver Queen.
Oliver.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, welcome, Oliver. And, you know, I was just like, oh, this is really great. But then I was like, actually, this is really great, but it's what came right before it that established what these, you know, what happened with the new X-Men book and with Uncanny at issue 281 when they kind of like restarted.
Mm.
And you had the blue team and the gold team.
Right.
Right before that, the X-Men were kind of all over the place. You had Charles Xavier was off in space with Leandra and the Shi'ar. You had, you know, the rest of the X-Men had kind of been blasted off by Lila Cheney into outer space as well to kind of help out. X-Factor had just gone through, you know, dealing with Apocalypse and Ship, and that was where they said goodbye to Nathan. You know, the really, really sad moment where Jean Grey and Cyclops had to, you know, send Nathan with, you know, the future agent, you know, into the year 3000 or so, where they knew that they would never see him again as a child.
And that was Wallace or whatever. He was doing those issues.
Yeah. Weiss was doing that. He was working on those. And I'm trying to think. Fabian Nicieza was writing X-Factor at that time as well.
Okay.
I think, you know,
with
Chris Claremont, and I think
that was Peter David was writing X-Factor.
No, not until after.
Oh, you're talking about before this? Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So all that was like kind of leading into, you know, the X-Men were kind of all over the place. X-Factor was kind of like dealing with that. People thought that X-Factor was dead. Like there was all this stuff that was going on.
And Excalibur was kind of like in its own corner.
Excalibur's off somewhere in the other world. Like they were traveling around the multiverse.
And that probably was around the time that Silvestri was on Wolverine too, right?
Yes, I believe Silvestri was on the.
So it's like image before image. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a perfect sort of like moment for them to reinvent everything, to bring everything together and, you know, kind of reboot the status quo. You know, getting all the messy stuff with the X-Men are finally out of, you know, out of the Savage Land, and all this other stuff is happening, and, you know, all this, the school, you know, in Westchester had been destroyed. The mansion wasn't there anymore. All this stuff was just sort of like, oh my God, we flattened the X-Men. We scattered into the winds. We got to do something. And the way that they kind of did it was through the Muir Island Saga. And the Muir Island Saga was essentially also subtitled the Shadow King Saga. In the issues, they kind of go back and forth with the name of the crossover itself. And the storyline, which you know, is interesting. And let me see if I've got the slides up here. I can add these, but there were a lot of really great moments in the Muir Island Saga. You had it involved 2 titles, Uncanny X-Men and X-Factor. Did not involve Mutants at all at that point in time. And that was right before, of course, they went from New Mutants to X-Force. So it was just right before that transition. X Factor had just been essentially labeled dead. Everybody saw their ship explode. Charles Xavier had just returned from space, hoping to sort of find where his X-Men were. He wanted to bring his X-Men back together. He still had, the team that had followed him into space, who then came back home with him. And then finally, here we go. If I can pull this up. All the other mutants, or all the other sort of like, team members that had been around, maybe in various iterations, they had all essentially been collected on Muir Island, which is where Moira McTaggart was. And they were there sort of it was a safe haven. It was one of those things where Moira had done research for a long time, but also that's where mutants kind of went to hang out when they weren't being used, when they weren't on a team. And, some great images, some great, Jim Lee classic images, as well as some different panel work kind of comes from this. And you see this classic, I just wanted to highlight this classic cover of Uncanny X-Men 280 that has Cyclops holding a shattered Professor X while he sort of zaps, into space with several of the other X-Men in various forms of costumes and or undress in the case of Logan, in the background, just sort of look on. But like I said, this whole storyline really used as its sort of main push the Shadow King infecting the world with hatred. And it was very, I'd say it was very pointed, kind of background to this story, where Shadow King had just started slowly filling the world with his influence, bringing up people's hatreds and just sort of really pushing it out. And he explains his evil plan essentially, at this point in the first page on Uncanny X-Men number 278, that people have prejudices and all this stuff, and it really doesn't take much for it all to come out, and that's kind of what he's been doing. And the nexus of this is taking place in Muir Island. And essentially, he's infected the mutants at Muir Island with kind of his, not really direct control, but enough that all of their dark inner desires have come out, and they, have embraced sort of a more violent, vicious self. And none of this personified more than Rogue, who essentially shows up, beats the crap out of Guido, and then there's a point where she's reflecting on how violent she was and how much she hurt him, and she hears the Shadow King's voice, and he kind of comes out of a mirror while she's taking a shower. So it's just her in a little towel with some steam, and just basically they lock lips or whatever the Shadow King kind of has. He doesn't really have lips, more like teeth, but she just starts making out with this image of the Shadow King. Very bizarre, but just indicative of kind of the whole feel of this story. And meanwhile, Charles Xavier is trying to figure out, trying to get back to the mansion just to see where it was. And Shadow King sends Colossus after him to kill him. Takes over his brain and tries to, pound him into submission that way. But it's really fascinating seeing all this come together. And of course, he sends Charles, this vision of all of his X-Men being wiped out on Muir Island. And it's well, you want your X-Men, you could come and try and get them, but they're all mine now. And in the image that I'm showing now, it has sort of a selection of all these mutants that are now under his control. You've got Madrox, you've got Siren, you've got David, aka Legion, Professor X's son. You have a couple other people there. Amanda something, who has, I guess, demons as her sort of mutant companions. But also, there's a very interesting image here, and that's Moira McTaggart. Now, Moira, if you've been following all of the Fall of X-Men stuff, she is a horrible monster, revealed in Hoxpox as sort of the catalyst for rebooting the universe multiple times. Every time she dies, it starts over with her birth, and she keeps kind of changing the timeline in a way to try and either save the mutants or destroy the mutants. The rest of the time, whenever she's shown in the comics, in X-Men comics up to this point, it's usually she's crying about something or just like really sad about her son being, evil, and just or crazy or whatever. But here she really kind of shows her sadistic side. Now, yes, she's under the influence of Shadow King, but she's wearing like this old, like Highlander kind of getup with a claymore sword that she never pulls out, she never uses. But she's just basically calculating and evil and pitting all these mutants together against each other in the most violent fashion. Because she's just like, yeah, I'm just seeing how well you guys fight, but go ahead. If you end up dying, no, who cares? Which is kind of like what she is now. But yeah, I mean, it's just very fantastic. Shadow King eventually takes over Legion's head. He uses all of his powers to kind of destroy everything. And again, this bounces back and forth between X-Factor and X-Men. A total of about 5 issues. But finally, through some wonderful machinations and the help of Mystique, hiding as good old Val from S.H.I.E.L.D., they're able to sort of defeat and weaken the Shadow King, and then eventually defeat him on the astral plane. Where he brings the X-Men in together with Charles Xavier, and they're able to destroy him. And also in the real world, turns out that Shadow King's been using good old Lorna Dane, also known as Polaris, as kind of his nexus to enhance his power. They also sort of rescue her and break his hold on the world. But in doing so, Muir Island's basically blown up. All these mutants are kind of like, well, what do we do now? And they end with essentially them saying, you know what? I think we've got enough mutants here. We're going to have some new teams. We're going to put them together. And voila. The next month, you've got Uncanny X-Men 281 with the debut of the Gold Team, and Adjectiveless X-Men with the debut of the Blue Team. And that 3-issue arc right here with Android M with Magneto also happens to be Chris Claremont's last X-Men story. That he finishes in 1991, and then he's done. He had actually, I think, quit a few months before, and this was just the last that got put out of the first 3 issues of X-Men. So he ended his run from I think it was 1975, 1974. When did Giant Size come out?
6. Because Len
so 75,
was first, like 2 issues, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But he ended his X-Men run with essentially X-Men 1, 2, and 3. And that was it, which he co-wrote with Jim Lee. And then he was done. But yeah, I mean, it's so much happens in that sort of lead up to the reveal of the new X-Men teams that are kind of like set in our heads as this was 90s X-Men. Just these 5 issues kind of throw all the toys together, mix them up a bunch, and then say, here you go. This is what we have to play with. Let's divvy them up and put them out in the world. And I thought it was just a really interesting prelude to the era of X-Men that we see in X-Men, the animated series, that we see in X-Men 97, and that a lot of people kind of refer to as back as their X-Men, of a certain age, obviously. But yeah, I don't know if you guys even remember this one, because I had.
Yeah, I mean, this is where they kind of lost me a little bit, because it was the start of the imagization of some stuff.
Very much.
The visuals took so much precedent over the storyline. Some of those early X-Men issues, you can read them in 3 minutes. Because almost half the issues are splash pages. And, something was, though Claremont could be rambling, and there's a lot of threads. If you go through his run, there's a lot of threads where he's like building something up and then never delivers. They just figure out what he's supposed to do. So I'm not going to hold him up to, an ideal as like, the all-time best comic book writer or most consistent. But this was where they kind of lost me. Because I really felt this was very much style over substance. But, at the same token, you say of a certain time, there's so many people that came in on the Image era. This is just right before it with many of the same creators. And I get that's their conception of this particular franchise. Yeah, I easily get that. Yeah.
And it's basically it's at the point where they're still following the Marvel format.
But
So
it's
there are,
also
and,
amazing because at the same token, when Peter David takes over X Factor, that's one of the most emotionally complex runs.
oh yeah,
and that's happening at the same time as the widescreen stuff that's going on in X-Men and in Japan.
Now I will say that X
Certainly
Factor is kind of like X Factor is a weird book itself because you had you got Claremont, but you also had Lee Simonson in the earlier part of the run.
Yeah,
and
then they like go in and out for a period. Yeah, it's weird.
Absolutely, yeah. But there was some really amazing writing going on, like right before Peter David takes over, which happens right after this. Like this starts the new X Factor book that has Polaris and Havoc and Guido and everybody. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that came out of the Muir Island Saga. Just basically said, hey, we're going to reset status quo here, and now shoot, do your thing.
And I have to pull out. I have to say for Bill, 281, because I was looking when Steve mentioned these. I was looking through them, and 281 is Uncanny. Is when they're split, and that issue, by the way, is written by John Byrne.
Yeah,
I've forgotten about that, but Donald Pierce is in that episode and in that issue. So he's in. Since we were talking about him being such
who cares about Donald Pierce? Who cares?
I know. There he is. He's right there.
Apparently, he keeps showing up.
I know. So yeah, he's there. Anyway,
maybe he is important. I don't know.
He's secretly the most important character in all of X-Men lore.
All of them.
Donald Pierce.
So yeah. I was a big fan of this era. I was still with the books at this point, and I was in our message group before we did this, about this is pre-Image, and Bill's already talking about it. I just realized is that most of, if not all, the Image guys came from Marvel. Weren't they all on Marvel books?
Yeah.
I was trying to think of any of them came from DC. I think they were all Marvel guys that went over to.
McFarlane's first breakthrough was Infinity Inc. at DC.
Oh, we did have that before.
And I think apart from Valentino, they all had done some work at DC.
Yeah.
Liefeld had done some DC stuff.
Oh, he did. Liefeld did Hawk and Dove. Right?
Hawk and Dove.
Yeah.
That's true.
Actually, which is really funny, given the one that didn't do anything at DC. I don't think. And he's supposed to.
We're taking it over.
The most associated with the company now. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So my turn, Steve.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So the two runs that I wanted to signal, one's very going way back, and then the other is just a character, because the X-Men have these ancillary characters that some of them are so fascinating, and sometimes they just run out of ideas with what to do with them after a big splash. I think the character right now that I can think of like that is Hope. It was such a great characterization at the beginning, and they really should do something more with her. But Dave, if you want to accompany some visuals here, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the run, which had Roy Thomas on scripts, but with issue number 56 of the original run in 1969 was when Neal Adams comes onto the title. And this was a big injection of excitement. It took me a long time to read these issues because they just weren't available, and back issues at the time were just, it was interesting because the back issues were expensive, not because of X-Men, but because of Neal Adams, because he was he had such marquee value, and trades were non-existent, and that was the landscape that existed then. But from 56 to 65, missing one issue, you have 9 issues there of Neal Adams on art with X-Men, and there's a lot of big developments that happened during this span. You have on this cover here, you have the introduction of the living monolith, which is more important to other areas of the Marvel universe than the X-Men, but it's easy to forget that was his introduction. Have they ever had like a big living monolith thing with X? I don't think so. I think they just
Not since. No.
threw him
No.
into Marvel Cosmic. But through this run, and I think, again, with the way that Neal Adams operated, he had a big stake in the plotting and in the certainly in the storyboarding of how these issues transpired. You had in this run, you have the return of the Sentinels, you have the introduction of Havoc, which, as Scott Summers' younger brother, becomes a major character as time goes on. You have the introduction of Sauron. You have more friggin' Khazar in the Savage Land. I don't understand why they always go back to the Savage Land. It's like there's one story that's just repeated again and again. You have what I consider the first time that Magneto really appears like the threat that he is, and how powerful he is, and not just a blah villain. So I think this is a very important run. Now, these were hard to come by. Steve, for people watching, I'm just going to give you some of the art. I absolutely love this costume for Warren of the Angel. And for some reason, he calls himself the Avenging Angel during this time period. And he's really angry. And there's like lots of stuff where his dad's trying to calm him. So this is almost a precursor to Archangel, because it's like over the top Warren being angry at everything. So you have that here. You have the introduction of Havoc. They don't really have his facial mask like right on the money yet, but the idea is there. So you have the first introduction of Havoc, who becomes, as I said, a major character. This next graphic I just think is great, because all that's happened is they've defeated the Sentinels. They're using a Sentinel ship to go home. That's all that happens. Another artist would not make this a double page spread, but I just think, and again, there's not much that goes on. It's Cyclops talking to a U.S. official and then them leaving. But this looks majestic. And Neal Adams at his peak was just so good with the double page spreads. He was so good at that. So that was just an example I wanted to show here. And then what I have here after is like kind of a cover gallery of how the first time I ever saw this was, yes, there was an issue 2 of Giant Size X-Men, but it came almost a full year later. And at that point, it was a reprint title. And then I think the time that most people were able to get these stories in their hands economically was when these were reprinted in the early 80s in the X-Men Classic. With reprinting the 9 stories over 3 issues. And then if you want to get these stories in one volume, I think the best way to do that right now is the 5th volume of Masterworks. The 6th volume of Masterworks, which has all the stories in there. That was a period. It was almost like with the, looking at the, as I mentioned, when I first came into X-Men, it was as a reprint title. They never got to the Neal Adams stories. They cut off like just a few issues before. So if they didn't do a revival for the X-Men, I wonder if you would have had like these like cheap reprints. You have that. And then one character that I really liked I know he was part of X-Men Blue when he became part of the regular Marvel Universe, but just seems to have disappeared. And that is Jimmy Hudson, who was the son of Wolverine, as part of the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimate Universe versions of the Alpha Flight. What are the Guardian and Vindicator? The Hudsons,
right.
James and Heather. And the Marvel Universe, they were not Canadian. They were living in. You might really like this. Tampa. is where Ultimate X takes place. And you see here, there's this teenager. His name is Jimmy Hudson, and he's getting angry about something. And there's some very familiar adamantium claws that come out. So Ultimate X is basically his origin story. It's revealed that in the X, at this point in the Ultimate Universe, this is after Magneto has killed Wolverine, and Wolverine has sent a message to Jimmy Hudson that he is his actual father. His mother is Magda, who is Magneto's first wife and the mother of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So that matters later. But Ultimate X is a really cool intro story. And then we've been joking, I think mostly before the show, about like writers in their 40s that write teenagers. This is one where Loeb really got it right. I mean, these not just Howlett, but the other inhabitants of the high school that he's part of. Just really on the money in terms of a believable teenager that's grappling with finding out that he's not who he thought he was. And then they follow up later. He becomes part of the regular X-Men team. And then there's a nice, real, almost like kind of like a capstone on this with another series, which was Ultimate Comics Wolverine, which is one of those stories where the past and the present kind of coexist narratively, where you have some of the background story of Wolverine and Magda and this concept in there of within the Ultimate Marvel universe that there is this trigger that happens. So, with most mutants, it is at puberty, but there's a strain of mutants where it's still dormant, and they call this strain the mother vine because it's basically like almost lineage. It's not almost lineage, it's lineage. So that there's all these like mutants that haven't really awoken yet, because for some reason puberty didn't really set it off. And it tells a story of Wolverine slightly in the past, of first finding out about this mother vine, and then in the present day, Jimmy Hudson with his half brother Quicksilver, who's a real dick in the Ultimate Comics universe. I mean, it's not the Pietro we know and are frustrated by. So in the end, there's a nice moment where Jimmy Hudson fully accepts that his role in the Marvel universe going forward is going to be Wolverine. I know this character was part of X-Men Blue when, after Secret Wars, there were some inhabitants of the the Ultimate Universe that ended up in 616. I have not followed the character since. I've heard it's not very complimentary what they've done with him, but I think those two miniseries are really good, and they're both only 4 issues long. Nice little nuggets, and they're both really good at presenting what the landscape of that universe and that world is like, and you really don't have to like reference back to Ultimate X-Men by Millar. You don't have to do a lot of reading to get what you need out of these two miniseries. So that was just one I want to highlight, because I do think Jimmy Hudson's X-23 is not the only interesting scion of Wolverine. There's another one out there.
What, you mean you don't like Daken? Nobody likes Daken.
Mainly because he rhymes with rockin'.
I'm not a fan of Dawkins or Dolkin, so I don't like Daken. So with Jimmy Hudson, I was first introduced to Jimmy Hudson because I didn't read any Ultimate comics for a long time. When he popped up in Bendis's, because I think it was Bendis who was writing X-Men Blue, because it still contained some of the all new X-Men, the teenage X-Men still around. So so it was using Bendis's versions of the X-Men and this version of Jimmy Wolverine from the Ultimate Universe that Bendis was part of. So it was interesting. I just kind of thought it was an interesting character, but they really didn't do too much with him, and then he disappeared. Like he's really not been seen much of anything. He popped
And I
up.
understand it because I think Lara is such a more well-defined character that what do you do with him? And maybe give him a home in the new the new Ultimate Universe. But I did think there was a lot of potential for the character there because he was so not like Logan. He was measured. He was thought out. I mean, he had the hang-ups that a lot of teenagers have, and the self-doubts that a lot of teenagers have. But he was, in some ways, he was Logan's son in name only. So
plus he was blonde.
What?
Plus
he was blonde. Yeah.
So totally different character.
But it was also interesting as the series went along, his hair got more Wolverine-y.
Yeah.
And it was
he grew it out, and then it
it was such a nice subtle touch if you noticed it. But I just think that's a testimony because to the franchise itself, there's pockets of it that there's like these little gems, and I do think Jimmy Hudson is a character that they should have done more with.
Yeah.
I
because I'm a huge fan of X-23. So for me, I was like, I've already kind of got my kid of Wolverine kind of fixed, but like as a character, Jimmy's he's got interesting potential. But again, in like the main universe, they've filled all of those roles.
But if whether it's on Marvel Universe or some other resource, if you read these series just by themselves, you won't get like crazy fix. You just realize that it's like Wolverine remixed, and that he's not the 616 Wolverine, but there's enough like core concepts that it's easier for you to grasp the concepts. So it's good stuff. Both of them are really good series.
Now I'm gonna have to pick it up. I never read that Ultimate Comic X series at all. So
the Millar stuff is really good widescreen comics. Starting with the Tomorrow people, but like all the Ultimate Universe, it like just trails off into weirdness after a point. But
and then they killed everybody.
Definitely music it. Yeah, and then everybody dies.
Everybody dies except for Miles. Everyone but Miles dies. Yeah.
Right.
No, there's a few.
But maybe he'll come back with the new Ultimate Universe.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, but it does sound like Peach and Momo. Peach that's maybe doesn't fit with her concept. So
well, I mean, it could because she's reimagining a lot of these characters sort of as kids, kind of similar to how she did it, but sort of did it in like Edo period, in her last sort of series of one shots and X books. But like this time they're kind of modern. It's modern era, but they're all younger. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. She very well could go ahead and add him in. Like, who's this weirdo exchange student?
Okay, we're looking at the clock, so we're gonna start wrapping things up. Before we get to our end segments, Tony, I just wanted to know if you wanted to take some time to tell us about Travel Motion and your new YouTube channel and other stuff you have going on.
Sorry, did you hear that? That was weird. I don't know if that came through the microphone at all. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can. So you see my little tag is Travelmation Panda. So thank you for that. Actually, one of my side gigs is I have a travel business, and so I do all types of travel. Mostly, it seems I thought I was going to be a Disney guy, but it tends to be mostly cruises is what people look for in these days. But I can do it all, that type of stuff. But you can find me on a lot of socials, just at Travelmation Panda, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. That whole side goes on. And then I don't know. I think at the age of 54, I thought I'd be like a one job kind of guy, but I have so many going on now. I never, most of my career, I never worked more than one job, but then somewhere in a year and a half ago, I decided to take up travel business again. I used to do that in the early 90s and everything. And, but then I'm also, as I think Bill knows, because we talked about theater, I'm the artistic director for a theater company. So a lot of these posters are all the shows that I've done. And so I'm doing that. That's a volunteer thing that I do. So I have that. Oh, by the way, can you guys see that? Do you guys recognize what that is? I was going to bring it up earlier. Can you see who that is? It's kind of far away.
Yeah.
It is far away, but
it's the ambiguously gay duo from SNL.
Oh,
as drawn by Alex Ross, and it's signed by Alex Ross, by the way. So it's right there.
What?
But,
What?
yeah. Actually drawn and signed by him. So that's one of my things. So anyway, so I have, Michael Hartney, who's been on your show. In fact, him and I are both Travelmation travel agents. So he's got his business and mine, and so we split the market for the gay bear travel agent thing right now, I guess. So both being comic book geeks and travel guys. So so that's one thing. And then my husband and I have bought an RV. So we bought a fifth wheel back in October, and we're starting to flirt with the whole RV life. So right now we have this house, and we have my mother-in-law living here, but we're trying to get away on our RV, and so we started a YouTube channel, which is Gil Complex. So Gil Complex is Gil, the first three letters of my last name, Com for Compton, Plex, Complex. And so we have this RV channel that we're starting. So the travels that we're doing, we're going to put them onto just a travel blog, and it kind of relates to my travel business. So I travel, do all these different things, because that's kind of taken up my life now. And so all these things are going on in addition to my main career, which is I lead a learning development team for a credit union. So I stay pretty busy. I thought I wasn't going to be this busy at this age, but and then I read comics and all that type of stuff in between. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah,
you've got some time in the day somewhere, I'm sure.
Somewhere.
The comics, so it's like
yeah. So
what's happening at your theater this season?
We're thanks for asking. We're in our 25th anniversary season. So Mad Theater of Tampa started back in 1999, and I've been with them since 2011. And so this is our 25th anniversary season. So we just finished doing the 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee musical. It was fitting for the 25th season. And then we're right now in rehearsals for Urinetown. So Bill, you might know it. I don't know, Steve, have you heard of Urinetown?
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, everybody thinks, like, if you use and you try to type it in with auto Siri or anything, they spell out your in town, not urine town. So so that's a musical we're doing in rehearsals for. That goes up in June 14th to the 29th at the Stratus Center for the Performing Arts, which is our big theater complex here in downtown Tampa. So that'll be the end of the season, and then we're going to announce the new season for the 26th season here soon. But we haven't decided on those last dates. But so it's kind of busy with that too. So there was a rehearsal tonight, and I don't go to them all because I just don't have time, obviously. But they had a rehearsal tonight, and we got a rehearsal video right before we came on show, and so I got to see Cop Song from the show and how they're doing that. So it's pretty great. Yeah, cool. So a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right.
Keep it busy, I hear. Keep it busy.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start wrapping this show up, and when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears up, we throw two segments at you. The first is where we show off our geekettes. Steve, you sort of showed off what you have there with that beautiful X-Men 130 poster.
So this actually came from again my comic shop. Tony over at A Pennyworth loves to hold for me a lot of the Marvel posters, DC, Image promotional posters that he gets. And this one was actually for the upcoming, and I think they have released it, a facsimile edition of 130 of the X-Men. So it is nice looking at this one. Notice on here that they had taken the price off, which I believe would have been, it was like 25 cents maybe. But of course, you can get your own facsimile copy for $3.99, I believe. Yeah. So,
right.
Did you just get that when I mentioned it? Like, did you already did you have it already?
Oh, I picked this up. This one I picked up a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
But
so
I was like, the thing is, I try to match it with our theme.
Yeah.
For our show, if I could find something that kind of works.
Okay,
over to Tony. Tony, can you show off some geekette you've recently got?
Yeah, this is total, and I don't know if I'll ever play this, but it was perfect. There's Lorcana cards. So there's a whole thing of these cards that are all Disney inspired. So they're all what I think is pretty cool is, it's a card game like it is. There you go. There's a good one. So it's a card game and that you play like Magic the Gathering, but it's all with Disney characters. And what I love about it is that it's all original art, right? That they've made for it. So it's not like they just use clip art from other things. Every single card has some original artwork that's done. So I totally picked up, I think I have stacks of them. I picked up like 250 of these cards at Target. And then I bought all the sleeves for them, just like you put sleeves for your comic books. And I put them in order and all that. I have no idea how to play the game. Absolutely no idea. But of course, just like collecting comics, the whole thing is that, if you play, you need 4 of every single card, and there's like hundreds of them. And then if you're really into it, you have one deck, a master deck that you don't touch. Sound familiar? And then you have 4 sets of every card to play with. So of course, now that's a challenge. That's like they're worth, some of them are worth, some money, just like with comics and everything. So now it's kind of my new thing. So I haven't gotten a binder and a book to put them in here, but soon. And we'll see how far it goes. I have a friend that kind of turned me onto it, and I just kind of went crazy. So yeah. So if anybody plays Lorcana, please reach out to me at Travelmation Panda. Let me know, because I'd love to meet other people who do this. So
all right, very cool. Okay, so for my Wolf of the Week, here's a wolf from the Geek Gets. Here's a Geek Get. When Steve started talking, I went into the bedroom because
real.
Well,
I have that effect on most men.
But
I start talking and they leave the room.
There's a small bookcase with some VHSs, and 2 of them were the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends episode with the X-Men.
Oh my God!
A Firestar is Born, and then the Pride of the X-Men VHS.
Wow!
Yeah, so these were earmarked to go into the storage space. I had not packed them up yet, but I was able to show them off tonight. So there's that.
Look at that. That's great.
Yeah,
that's the copy of Pride of the X-Men that I used to rent.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. And it's like this was like on like EP mode. Oh my God. must have only lasted like about 10 views, so anyway, for my Geek Gets, the revival of the world's greatest superheroes Mego figures continues apace. I'm awaiting on my main shipment, which is going to be 6 figures. But I got 2 others that have already come in. One is of Two-Face. Oh, wow. And the other is of Bizarro. So,
I love that Bizarro.
Yeah, and these boxes are, basically, they never were figures back in the day of Bizarro or Two-Face in the 70s, but it's in the original type of packaging that the Mego figures were in. So it's my Geek Get. Neat. All right, we're gonna wrap this episode up, and when we do wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears up, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week. In the bear community, if you find a fellow attractive, you woof at him, and we do something very similar here, where we woof at something that may be comic book related, or a comic book itself, or a television program, or a TV, or a film, or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start, as I always do, with Steve. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
My Woof of the Week is a TV show. Hey, big surprise for everybody. And this one is just released today as we're recording, and it's the new series Dead Boy Detectives. And this one, of course, had tried... originally was set up to premiere on Max. I think when it was originally in the planning stages, it was going to be a spin-off of the episode of Doom Patrol where the Dead Boy Detectives appeared. And of course, they had all the changes over at HBO Max and WB Discovery, and this was one of the unfortunate victims of that. However, it was shopped around. And Netflix, of course, who had just, had gotten the rights to Sandman, and I think they had finished the Sandman the first series at that point, the first season. And they decided to take this and they retooled it just enough that it is now connected with the Sandman universe. So I watched the first episode. It is 8 episodes. And of course, Kirby, who plays Death in Sandman, appears here as Death again. Yes, it's Kirby. Kirby Howell Baptiste, I think, is her full name. But in the credits, she is now, single, monogamous name of just Kirby. So
much like
it's fun.
It's like Bill
Sting,
Ward
Cher, Kirby. That's her. She does a fabulous job, and she's amazing. But also, I think the cast is fun. They're 20 somethings playing teenagers, whatever. But they're fun. They're goofy. They've got snappy dialogue, and I think that the villain from the first episode is so well played and uber camp. There is a lot of great casting here, and I'm really excited to see the rest of the series.
Did all of the episodes drop at the same time?
They did. So all 8 episodes are available.
Cool.
So you can binge watch them, or you can be as me and just sort of like, over several days.
And I have to say, it's really nice to see, especially with Netflix, after they pulled the plug on Grendel, basically halfway through filming, that a Matt Wagner co-creation is on Netflix. I think that's very cool. So.
And he's not listed as an executive producer, but Neil Gaiman is on this one. So Neil at least had input on it.
All right. Over to Tony. Tony, what do you have for a Wolf of the Week?
And it's not a new series, I have to say. It's a TV series as well, but I'm a big fan of it, and I just finished watching season 4, and that is For All Mankind. Have you guys talked about For All Mankind?
We have not.
Oh,
really? Oh, so it's it's not a comic book or anything like that, but it's a great show, and it's for those that don't know, it's kind of takes the whole landing on the moon and all that, and where it flips and the Russians beat us, or they get to it, or does the Chinese, all this kind of story, and it flips the entire history, and every season is almost like a different decade, so it's caught up basically now to it. But I think it's an Apple TV series, and it's really good. The characters are great. It got renewed for a season 5, so if you're interested in doing it, it's they're about 10 episodes a season to do it, but they're full hour long episodes, right? It's not like a 34 minute episode type of thing. It's full hours for it to watch. But I think it's a great show. And if you're a fan of the old series, The Expanse, that was on Sci-Fi and then went to Prime. So this whole thing, as it's gone, it's like they've done the moon, then they went to Mars, and then this season, not to spoil, I won't spoil it, but there's a asteroid aspect to it. And as it approaches into season 5, it has very much similarities to The Expanse, because there are people from Earth, there's the Mars people, and then there's the Belters, who all live in the asteroid belt type of area. And it's almost as if this series is becoming The Expanse in some way, even though it's very realistic bound, but there's so much similarities. Of course, the theorists, they are thinking, oh my God, it's becoming The Expanse. So I got turned on to it, not because it was anyway related to it. I just thought the series was kind of cool. But it's a wolf for me. I think if you don't watch it, please take a look. It's a great series to watch.
I heard they're also doing a spin-off too that's going to focus on the Russian side of things.
That's right.
The Russian characters. Yeah. So that I think is it's pretty cool. I have not started it, but I've been following, each season as it comes out. So I've been, catching up with synopses like a dork, rather than actually watching the episodes. But it's fascinating, and when I have time, I will devote 40 plus hours of my life binging it. Because I'm a huge fan of The Expanse. I love The Expanse. I love the comic spin-offs of The Expanse. So anything anything that's kind of in that wheelhouse, even though it's an earlier era, I do
very much so. Yeah. You'll see. Maybe by the time you get to the end, if you see the similarities that I see and a lot of people have been seeing. So who knows? Okay, Bill.
Okay, well, for my Wolf of the Week, I have chosen the Synanon fix.
And I do have a graphic.
Yep, which is a 4-part documentary series about Synanon, which basically started life as a therapy group to combat alcoholism and ended up being a full-fledged cult. So the 4 episodes, cover the origins. The creator was Charles Chuck Diederich Sr. Basically took the methods that he had discovered worked for him in combating alcoholism in his own life and spread that to other people. But as time went on, there were non-alcoholics that joined the group, and then by the 70s and early 80s, they were a full-on cult with guns and calling themselves a church. And it's a really crazy story about megalomania associated with any sort of group structure is just bad news. Another thing that really struck me was how similar some of the practices were to Scientology. There's a practice that is right out of Jim Jones and People's Temple, Nexium. I mean, which is, I gotta say, it's like I have watched every cult documentary you can think of, and at some point you're seeing similar overtones and similar dynamics, and that's one of the most worrisome and troubling issues, because these groups don't seem to be going away. There seems to be a new dynamic and a new formation popping up again and again. How public the group was, though, led to its downfall, which is interesting because you had many cults that are insular, and in this case they certainly were insular, but they had their outside promotion, and they were very active in media circles promoting the group, and that's a little different from how insular particularly Scientology is. But 4 episodes, 4 hours, and it's a pretty well balanced and well formatted documentary series, the Synanon Fix.
Yeah. I love documentaries. I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah, I need to catch up. I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but I mean, how the turn happened. You were saying that they were they've always been very public facing. In fact, I think there was a movie that they made very early on where it was all about it. It was
they were active in business communities. They were active in Hollywood circles. But
then when they started, and I think they even had this in the first episode, when they started using the game with children, making kids who were kind of forced to be in this daycare, the school, when people moved in to the recovery house, having to play the game with each other, 9-year-old kids calling each other fuck faces, was crazy to me.
Yeah,
I was like, what the? Whoa.
The one thing I will say about this particular cult, it seemed that leaving was a little easier than some other groups.
It did.
You want to be part of this? Go. I mean, it wasn't that kind of dynamic. I'm not saying that it's hooray, Synanon.
Let's do it.
But fully,
you can just give it a shot. If you like the cult, you can stay. If you don't, you're free to leave.
But there's one tactic that is so close to Jim Jones and People's Temple that it was shocking. It was really shocking.
Right.
But I mean, should I worry about myself that I basically watch every cult documentary that's out there? Might say so.
No. I mean, I watch most of the same ones that you do, so.
I know.
I mean, I guess I'll be fully aware of when I, do join a cult. I'll be like, hey, this is just like they did it. This reminds me
like
so
season
much.
2. Yeah. All right.
This is just like season 2. Oh my God, it's episode 3 of Cult Justice all over again. How did I walk into this?
All right. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us. I hope
thanks for having me
many times.
Yes, thank you.
It's the first time, apart from videos, I've heard your voice, and oh my God, what a radio voice! Oh my God, wow, chef kiss.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
All right. So again, we are the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the X and the Blue Sky and the Threads and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to listen to us, you can do so through catching us through Apple Podcasts and many of the other podcatching platforms. Last time around, we talked about how well we're doing on Google Podcasts. So, nope, sorry, not Google Podcasts.
YouTube Music.
Yeah, so
which is by the way, if you do use YouTube Music, they are improving the podcast experience for people who are listening for podcasts.
So if you're catching us through that, thank you. If you're catching us through our YouTube feed, thank you. Please like and subscribe and leave a good review. We would really appreciate it. And if you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. So until next time, I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
If you're listening to the audio, go ahead, Tony. Speak in there. Go.
I got it. That's all right.
We're so used to shy people. If you're listening to the audio version, you're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone.
Woof.